Hi, friend and retro music lover. This is Ethan, aka the Ghost Mall, and coming to you today from my home studio. And I thought that maybe I would just give you a little bit of a glimpse into a bit of a production session, some of my workflow, some of the synthesizers I use, some of the techniques I use, sort of just some of the ways I think about retro music and how we can make it in this ultra modern day and age. I do not have a $1 million analog recording studio straight out of 1985. That would be the ideal. A nice 24 channel SSL console with a couple tape machines and a whole backline with a bunch of outboard gear, some Eventides and some LA2As and some 1176s and stuff. I don't have that. I have a basement studio with some decidedly modern gear, all computer based, digital. But the advantage of that is that I have great replicas of almost every piece of gear that was popular and beloved in the 80s and in the early 90s, which is the period of time I'm focused on. And that includes not only, synthesizers and samplers that cost thousands of dollars at the time and outboard gear, even console emulation, but also some of the other more consumer tech that made its way into music, like video game console sound chips and the like. And I love that. I love being able to have it all at my fingertips, multiple instances of whatever I want at my fingertips, and being able to say, audition, oh, that Jupiter 8 brass sound is good, but for this song I'd rather it be from a Matrix 12 or something, and at the push of a button I can do that. But anyway, I won't talk too much. I'm going to see if I can make some music here for you. This is going to be a little bit unusual for me. My primary workstation software of choice is Cakewalk Sonar Platinum. I've been using Sonar since I think version 3, many years ago now. But I also use this, which is Propellerhead's Reason. I've also been using this since I think the first version, actually. And I love it. It's come a long way. It wasn't really a DAW to begin with. It was more just like a synth rack without audio recording capabilities. But I use them both in tandem a lot. Now, there have been some productions I've done for the Ghost Mall that were done exclusively in Reason. Fare Thee Well is one of them. Forget the Sunset, actually, all the instrumentation for that was done in here, although it was mixed in Sonar. And the reason I like it is it just has a plethora of really cool sound design kind of elements and instruments over here, devices that you can't get anywhere else. This is one of them. Of course, the Yamaha DX line of digital synths was, instrumental, sort of emblematic of 80s music, pop music production, and this is a great emulation of that. So what I think I'm going to do today is I'm going to work on maybe putting together a little track. I have no real direction for this. I just want to kind of let you see a little bit of how I work. But one of the things that I'm a big proponent of in music production is setting limitations for yourself. I think that I used to be one of these people, creatives are as they are, and we tend to think that the bigger the palette, the better. The broader the spectrum of colors we can paint with, the better. And I actually find that to not be true, because I also find that a lot of creatives, and I'll just speak for myself, but I know I get paralyzed with choices. I do fall into that trap they call analysis paralysis very easily. And it makes me less creative rather than more creative. So I like to, whether it be in the songwriting phase or the production phase or the mixing and mastering phases, I like to have a limited number of choices within which I'm going to try to be as creative as I possibly can. It actually forces me, I think, to be more creative, to say I'm only going to use 3 or 4 synths on this, and I want to see how far I can push them. Or, for example, I have a list of like a dozen and a half plugins for mixing that's like my core plugin set, and I don't always mix this way, but I sometimes challenge myself to just go with those and see, can I mix a song with that. So for this session, I'm going to lean on this PX7 FM synthesizer, which again is a replica of 6-operator FM synths like the DX7, also the DX1, which was a dual layer. That's a nasty sound. Let's find something a little nicer here. That's nice. That's a nice DX kind of sound. Anyway, so the PX7 is great at emulating DX7, DX1, dual layer kinds of stuff, DX7 Mark II, and I have a gigantic collection of patches for that. So I'm going to use that. I'm also going to use, I'm going in a real digital direction with this today, I think, not analog. I'm also going to use a great instrument that if you are a Reason user, you should really check out, but I think it's the only platform it's available on as far as DAWs go. This is the FM4 synthesizer from Primal Audio. And what this is it is a 4-operator FM synthesizer. And that may not mean a whole lot to you, or it might, I'm not sure. But the 6-operator, which was like in the DX7, allowed for lots more lush kinds of sounds, complicated kinds of sounds. The FM4, being fewer operators, had a raw kind of, maybe more lo-fi kind of sound, particularly when it came to the 4-operator synths that were basically in chip form in game consoles, like in the Sega Genesis. That was a 4-operator Yamaha FM synthesizer built into the Genesis. So, for example, this bass sound right here should be reminiscent of maybe if you grew up like I did, loving games like Streets of Rage. It sort of has that plasticky yet really funky kind of sound. And one of my favorite features of the FM4 is this little model area here. It says lo-fi, and what this does is it emulates some of the noise from the noisier versions, like the Genesis, of FM4 synths. Now we're getting somewhere. That sounds Genesis-y. And if you want to go even nastier, like a Mark II version of the Genesis, by itself, that might not even be a real usable sound. It's so noisy, but in a mix, it could be interesting texture-wise. So, again, if you are a Reason user, I would highly recommend the PX7 and the FM4 if you're into retro sounds. The last thing I'm going to try to use a bit of is not an instrument. So we have instruments in Reason. We also have refills, which are put together with a combination of maybe patches for different Reason instruments, samples, loops, stuff like that. And Sound Cells is a great manufacturer of these refills. They do some really unique kinds of things. And this one that I just opened is called Digital Genome. And what it is it's a set of samples, well, not really samples. It began with samples from the Amiga 1200, which was a later version of the Amiga series of personal computers. If you're into retro sound, you'll know that especially the earlier versions of the Amiga are well known for their Paula sound chip, which was sample-based. It was 4 channels, and it did operate in stereo, but the way the stereo channels were oriented, you had 2 over here and 2 over here, so there was never going to be something really summed in the middle. So if you hear this really lo-fi, crunchy set of samples with sort of 2 things happening on the left, 2 things happening on the right, that may be an Amiga soundtrack. But what they did with this refill is that that was their starting place. But then they really amped things up with lots of effects and processing and stuff. But it still has a sort of 8-bit retro sound. Here's an example. Let's see what else we got here. Laser harp. You know I can't see that and not open it. What's this going to be? Nice. So, yeah, I'm going to limit my sound choices to these three sources today: the Propellerhead PX7, the Primal Audio FM4, and the SoundCell's Digital Genome Refill. I might reach for my favorite thing for drums in Reason, and pretty much every 80s oriented production I've done in Reason, the Go Small production I've done in Reason has had drums from this, is the jiggery pokery sound. That's the manufacturer. It's called Kings of Kong. The reason being is that Kong is the drum sampler, well, one of the drum samplers, the more advanced drum sampler in Reason. And what this has is, as you can see here, a long list of kits built from samples from classic drum machines. So I'm obsessed with the EMU Drumulator. Great sound. That's the 80s right there. That clap. With a little bit of, so there are effects built into the Drumulator here. And they've got this really nice drum room reverb going on. Much less tasty that way. All right, so you can see why I might reach for this particular refill for drums in a retro style. We've got your Drumulators, you've got your SP12s, your Lindrums, of course. Got to have your Lindrums. And these aren't just the raw samples either. As you can see, we've got processing going on here. In addition to the reverb, we've got like bus compression. We've got some great units in here for shaping the kind of sound on a per pad basis. You'll see that as I go through the pads, these effects units are going to change. Okay, so that's enough talking, I think. I'm going to just start from scratch here and see what I can make. So the way that I like to think about approaching writing and production is to have some kind of sound in mind before I begin. That both informs the choices of the limitations I'm going to set for myself. Like, for example, the choices I made with these units. It's because I'm thinking about something, like I said, more digital and more bright, perhaps. Maybe lo-fi, but dirty in a digital way. As opposed to something analog, like warm and lo-fi in a really kind of like analog grit kind of a way. And I'm actually thinking about maybe doing something a little video gamey here. The FM4 has great, like I said, Sega Genesis type sounds, and the Digital Genome Refill has those Amiga type sounds. So let's just see what we can make here. The other limitation that it's good to start out with is a key. If I don't know that, I haven't selected it, you know, in my head going in, which I usually don't. Pretty quickly, I'll figure it out when I lay my hands on the keys here. So let's start with the Digital Genome Refill. And there are lots of places to begin a song. I used to, and I think most of us start this way. This was nice. I used to always begin with chords, you know, just coming up with some kind of a chord progression and that I liked, with the sound that I liked and could jam with. And then later I would, you know, put a melody on top of that. As I progressed as a songwriter, what I've found to be a far more effective method for building like really memorable songs is to start with the melody. Because for two reasons. Not only is the melody the heart of the song. If you have a melody, even if it has no accompaniment, you have a song. Especially you know, in vocal work, if you have a melody and lyrics, that's your song right there. That's what people are going to be able to sing, even if they don't have a band or, you know, a track to accompany them. And if you have that solid, then everything around it is just, ear candy. But having said that, I really am interested in, cool chord voicings, cool extensions, cool transitions and modulations and going out of key this way and that way. I am by no means the world's most versed or effective keyboard player at all. In fact, full disclosure, for most of my music career, I was primarily a guitar player. From the age of about 13 until, really just a couple of years ago, that was my primary instrument until an injury made it so that it was really difficult for me to play. I always played keys. I always was producing my own records from the age of about 15 or 16, and keys were part of that, but they were just sort of a tool, and so I'm very utilitarian with it. But I admire great jazz key players and great pop producers who really have a sense for great voicing. So all of this is to say that I think coming up with an interesting melody to start with forces me to be even more creative when it comes to putting cool chord voicings around it, and I usually come up with better chord progressions that way if I start with the melody. So alright, enough talk. Let's see. Earlier I was playing in the key of G minor. So G minor would be, whoops, with a E flat. Then I started to find some phrases that sounded good like this, with that raised sixth, I guess. Now, somebody can correct me because I'm sort of just thinking off the top of my head, but doesn't that make that Dorian mode? Let's see. Yeah, so based with C as the tonic, I know D is Dorian, and I think that has the same interval relationships as this. That's kind of a cool sound. So let's see if I can come up with some kind of, if not a melody, at least a theme based with that scale, with this sound. Oh, I like that. So I will also start to kind of outline maybe the bass notes here, which is going to give me a sense for what chord voicings I could use if I hear that in my head. So I'm hearing the root, the tonic, to this C with that melody. Alright, so another thing to know about writing melodies is there's always this fine balance, right, in songwriting between repetition and variation. And it's really one of those balances you want to get right. Too much repetition, people are going to just turn that off and not want to have anything else to do with it because it's irritating. Too much variation, people are going to turn it off because it's hard to follow. And it's not satisfying. So if you have a phrase like, maybe the variation is the next phrase begins that way but ends differently. Let's try that. Yeah. So what I'm doing here is I'm hearing this little half step, which puts us back in G natural minor, which is a nice, easy modulation to do coming out of the Dorian. Alright, and we can resolve back to that C major, which is not at all in the natural minor. Oops. would be C minor, but it is in the Dorian. So, okay, let's start with that. Now it's time to choose the tempo. And when I do this, of course, I've just played a phrase over and over several times. I want to get the tempo to sync up with the feel I had. So let's see what we got here. Obviously, this is going to be too fast. Let's try 100 and see where that leaves us. Yeah, okay, that's nice. I'm going to switch over here. Function F7 takes me to the sequencer from the rack. And I want to input quantize. Let's see. Whoops, input quantize. This is going to be a bit of an adventure for everybody involved with this stream here, because I actually am a little off my game and off my footing when I go back to producing in Reason, because I'm so comfortable with the hotkeys and the shortcuts in Sonar. But that's good. I think that sometimes being put a little bit off your footing forces you to pay a little more attention. So let's try this here. Let's record this melody before I've forgotten it. Alright, let's run that back and see what we got. Alright, so let's talk for a minute about, while I clean this up, how to approach structure, broadly speaking. Okay, so once you got a melody you like, that may serve, one of several purposes in the context of a song. Again, back to variation versus repetition. If this was my melody for 3 minutes or 4 or 5 minutes, obviously that's a losing kind of approach to songwriting. You want to have at least an A and a B. Even if this is going to be an instrumental piece, there's going to need to be some other melody to contrast with this one. With songwriting, the general approach to songwriting is you got your verses, you got your choruses as a minimum. And there are genres in which that is all you have, like traditional folk music, for example. Well, actually, sometimes it'll just be verse after verse after verse. But, most pop music structure is going to be A, B, A, B, C, B, B. Verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, chorus, with some additional variation. You could have an intro before, an outro after. Your bridge could have multiple sections that could be harmonically different from either the verse or chorus, or maybe one half of the bridge is a verse and the chorus is an instrumental, or the other half of the bridge is an instrumental, lead over the chorus progression, whatever. And of course, you've got your pre-choruses that bridge the verse and the chorus. So you may have up to, 5 different melodies going if you've got a verse, a pre-chorus, a chorus, bridge part A, bridge part B, or maybe, the bridge and an intro-outro melody, an instrumental thing or something. So I don't know yet what this melody might be. It's interesting. It may not be dramatic enough to be a chorus. Maybe it's a good start for a verse. But let's just copy that. And I think I could go a couple directions here. Either I could proceed with the melody and see what variation I get, and then make a determination about whether I've got a verse and a chorus, or what if I have to swap them. Or I could build the chords, or at least the tonic notes underneath this, so that I've got a sense for that. I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to do the latter, just so I get a sense for the anchoring notes here. Let's find a bass sound. Okay, so since I used the digital genome for the melody to switch things up. Let's go to the FM4 for a bass. I love those Genesis sounding basses. The thing is, this song is working out to be, let's go back to the rack, a pretty slow kind of a song, so I'm one of these funky basses that I'm used to, like the one I was showing you auditioning earlier, may not work. It's too percussive without enough sustain, I don't think. What else we got? Wow. Nothing like a four-voice FM for something really aggressive, I'll tell you what. I'm not sure I like the click on that attack, but it's kind of nice, kind of lo-fi-y. Let's try that, and it's got a decent amount of sustain. I don't know if I'll keep that, but it's a start, just to lay down the notes. Let's see what we got here. Oh! Alright, so again, throwing me off my workflow here. Instead of opening a new rack unit, I replaced the first one. So bear with me for a second. We're going to go back to refills. We're going to go back to digital genome. I know exactly the patch I was using was this bell. Let's back this up just a smidgen. Let's get that back. This one, right? Much better. Okay, so now let's try this again. FM4. There we go. Now we have 2 units. We were using this one. Now let's go back. This switch up the hotkeys here is really getting me off my game speed-wise, but that's okay. I'm going to slow it down and make good choices here with sounds and whatnot. Alright, that's sufficient for the moment. Let's track that in. Alright, so now I have effectively created an A melody, and I know a sense for where I might go with the harmonies because I've got at least the root notes underneath it. Whoops. And now let's see if we can elaborate on this melody and get a B section going. A little too far out of key there. Okay, so another principle that's worth discussing here, I think, is that sometimes I like to try, at least when I'm experimenting, at least when I'm first getting basic ideas down with a song, to maximize the difference the divergence between sections, whether that be in the melody itself or the arrangement. And so what I mean is, this melody we've already laid down is very legato, slow feeling. It has a slow feeling to it within the tempo 100 beats per minute. And you know, it's fairly well contained within, certainly within an octave here. And so for contrast, I could jump up, I could jump down. That would be in terms of pitch range variation. I could make it more staccato. I could have more notes rather than fewer. So let's experiment with that, doing something more staccato, kind of rapid fire maybe, at least filling the space with more notes, and maybe I'll go lower because at least in terms of a vocal range, if it was a chorus, often, but not always, the preference is to go upwards. You know, you want some kind of upwards movement in the chorus for drama's sake, for interest's sake. But let's just throw that out the window and see what happens if I come down a bit, and what if I don't start on the tonic. That's interesting. So we get a little bit of sort of a tension there, and a kind of rather dark but whimsical feel with this Dorian mode. Let's just see what happens if I bring this down then and play around with that. Interesting. So basically, that's giving it a double time feel there, and I'm feeling like the drums could possibly go double time there. For what role in a song this could serve, I'm not sure, but maybe even a bridge section. But I do want it to be not just the same pattern over and over. So let's see what I can do. That's kind of cool. That continues this sort of arpeggiation up further. Alright, so I can kind of get a sense now for what this might bridge to. So let me just see how this sounds. I might change the tempo a bit, but let's just see what happens with this at 100 beats per minute. Okay, so yeah, that's going to be like a 4-bar section. We've been working with 8-bar sections, so that's another variation where now the sections that's going to have a quicker, more staccato melody, a kind of double time melody, is also going to be half as long. And we'll see what we bridge to with that, but let's get this down. Whoop, not razor tool. That would be record in another DAW. Let's hit record. Now we're getting somewhere with a sort of built-up feel, so a kind of a sense of, not, if not climax, at least an approach to something more dramatic. So now let's see what happens if I follow that phrase up with something up here, and whether I'm going to stay with the Dorian feel or go back to the natural minor. I have to figure that out. I wonder if that actually is just going to be part 2 of this 4-bar phrase and make it a longer, more elaborate 8-bar transition. So my tendency there is to try to go back to the natural minor and see what happens. But I have no real sense for the chords that are going to surround this, so I think let's go back to seeing if we can add a bass line to that segment. Again, a lot of this stuff is just trial and error. I like to really think of the creative process in 2 very firm, very distinct, separate entities that never should overlap, which is the sort of intuitive, creative, spontaneous side, and the cerebral, intellectual, analytical side. And this is where you start, obviously, and you want to, in this phase, get as many ideas out as you can. No judgments, no decision making, no throwing babies out with the bathwater. You just throw ideas to the wall and you see what sticks, and it's really based on your gut. And sometimes your gut leads you in weird directions, but that's okay. Later on, you can edit, and that's an invaluable phase too. I used to be really anti-editing. I would go through the creative stage, cut a demo, and then I feel like, oh, I have a song now. And when someone would say, yeah, okay, I think this could be better, this could be better, that could be changed, I'd cut that out entirely, I'd freak. Now this was like 20 years ago when I was first, getting into songwriting, producing, and interfacing with other artists and stuff. And I would get upset about it because I didn't realize at that point that editing is a acceptable, an important part of the creative process, where you do sit down later and say, okay, that transition isn't working, or what have you. And you have to really, I think, make time for both of those elements, do them in the right order, but never let them overlap. So right now, we're generating ideas, we're not evaluating them, and we're not making any decisions. So let's see if I can come up with a bass line for this melody, and then I'm going to revisit the tempo, I think. So I like this sort of climbing feeling we're getting here. Uh, obviously this melody. It includes that E natural instead of the E flat. I went to the E flat in the bass line and it kind of sounded good. Why would that be? Let's see, I don't know. In a quirky way it sounds good. Let's try that with the E natural though, which I think would make a lot more sense. How bizarre. What am I missing here? Let's see what we can come up with here. Really what I'm doing here, I think, is modulating on a per bar basis back and forth between, or I would be if I follow this train of thought, between the natural minor and the Dorian mode here. I think so. I think that what I'm thinking of with the bass line is going to necessitate some changes in the melody, but for the better. So let's just lay down what I've got going on in my head now. Alright, so the places where the melody didn't make the most sense here were so instead of going down to the D here, I think I want to go to this E flat to correspond with that bass note. Let's come in here. Alright, let's move these up. There was another note in there in that scale. Already we've got, you know, a timing issue, a quantization error here, which I was going to fix anyway, so no better time than now to jump on in there. Let's see. That's pretty good. Alright, so let's see what we've got now. Alright, so the the shortcuts and hotkeys are coming back to me. To scroll horizontally in Reason, it's Shift and then mouse up and down. In Sonar, it's Control and mouse up and down, and that's just going to zoom me in, so that's useful though. So let's run this back and see what we got. Pretty nice, actually. I feel like at the end here, I'm wanting a tension of the, sort of a half step I'm hearing in my head. So let's see if I can get what that would be. Close. There we go. All right. Let's start with the bass line here. Okay, so I think first of all I need to, it's advisable to always stay organized, and to that end, let's save this, shall we? So I got the Go Small folder here with my Reason songs in it, and I tend to just really be very quick, and again, from the gut when it comes to naming drafts of things. Later I'll come up with an actual theme and an actual title, and usually the lyrics grow from there if it's going to be a vocal song, but that's a topic for another day. I just go with something that this is evocative of for me as it is right now. And so right now this is making me think of actually, honestly, a little bit of the sound of Castlevania. If any of you are familiar with that series, which I have no doubt a bunch of retro music loving people are, there's something about this which is making me think a little bit about Castlevania. So I'm going to call this Castlevania-esque. That's a mouthful. Yeah. Apologies for the all caps. I've got caps lock as my recording default key here, so can't caps lock that. Let's actually check if I'm still recording with you guys. Yeah, still recording. Cool. So now we've saved it. Let me go back to the razor tool and split off this B section, whatever it is, from the original section. Go in here and edit that bass line up. So I wanted to go let's just let's record that. Whoops, run it back a little bit. Alright, and now the melody doesn't correspond like I want it to, so let's run over to there and see what we can fix with that. It's this note that, not really what I wanted to play to begin with, but it certainly is not going to fit with that modulations there. I kind of want to go down, and that's going to resolve us nicely back to the G, to the root here. Okay, let's record that. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. I'm feeling pretty good about that. Let's save that. Now the question is, where do we go from here? This has already been a little bit of a long session, but even though it may seem minimal what we've gotten here, it's really not. If, as I was saying, if you've gotten a melody that is intriguing to you, that takes you on some kind of journey, that evokes something for you, an atmosphere or an emotion, and then you have a bass line at least outlining the potential harmonies you could use, especially if they're interesting harmonies, then you've got the backbone of what's going to become a song. Of course, rhythm is the next element, so probably that's where I'd like to go with this. Or, you know, the other divergent direction I could go would be to say, okay, if this melody is connecting me somewhere, which it feels like it is, this B section over here, where's it connecting me to? Is it going to connect me back to the beginning? I don't know. There's an easy way to test that out, though, isn't there? Let's set up some loop points and see what happens here. Again, looping in Reason is much different than it is in Sonar. I think I remember what you can do here. Let's do this. There we go. So let's see what happens if we loop this back to the beginning from this transition and how it sounds. Whoops. Would be good if I had that in the right spot. I knew that there was something I was missing there. Let's delete that. Try that again. Ah ha ha ha, you pesky little loop button. Always need to be pressed to work. Lesson learned, buddy. Let's try that again. Okay, so that actually is kind of interesting to me. It's obviously works. It's obviously satisfying in its own way. What I could imagine being really cool here is if we had some kind of drums, double timing it to drop back, and so let's say there's no drums the first time through this. Maybe some percussion in the second iteration. Get some double time drums going here, and now we've got drums going into the second time we hear this. Full drum set, whatever, but halftime again. That would give them a lot of impact. That would be an interesting thing to do. I still do not think in any way, shape, or form that this deserves to have sort of chorus status. I feel like what we may have here is verse 1, pre-chorus 1, and need a chorus. But there may be a moment in the tune where this pre-chorus can loop back on the verse, and we can experiment with how satisfying that feels, how it would be different from it building into a chorus. It's not unheard of to have a song where you've got verse, pre-chorus, and you surprise the listener by returning to the verse instead of going to the chorus and making them wait a little longer for the chorus. So that's one possibility. But I think that what I want to do now, I'm going to run off for lunch here soon, so let's just see if we can get some rhythm instruments introduced in here. Before wrapping this up for today, and then we'll have the real solid foundation for a song. A melody, a variation on the melody, a real basic bass line for the roots of the chords, and some kind of rhythm. So again, let's go with my limitations here. I've stayed within the realm of my limitations that I set for myself. FM4, digital genome. I might use the PX7 for some kind of pad at some point, but let's go to the Kong, and let's go to Kings of Kong and find a drum set, a drum kit, a vintage, retro drum kit that's going to work. It's always hard to find this one for some reason. There it is. Now, talk about drums for a minute. Talk about 80s and early 90s retro drum sounds. I'm a fanatic for drum machine sounds. I feel like maybe more than anything else, maybe more than the synthesizers of the age, the drum machine was a defining characteristic of 80s music. And that's not just pop music, it was also soundtrack music and all that stuff. And what I love is that every drum machine that was popular back in the day has its own signature sound, has its own character, has its own personality. And it takes a while to get to know them, but for example, now I would never mistake a TR-808, for example, for a Lindrum, or even a TR-707 for a drumulator, because those latter are two of my favorite machines, and I know that they sound different, even though they sound similar. Um, so, with this particular sort of mysterious atmosphere going, I'm not really sure what to go with. I tend to go with the 707 for things that I want to have some punch and some real danceability, and that's not what I'm feeling with this. I tend to avoid the 808 actually because, first of all, everybody talks about 808s and it's so, I don't want to say it's played out. Naturally, it's an awesome sound. But I think that also the relationship of the 808 to 80s music is overstated because, at least in the pop realm, that's not what was being used. The 808s and the 909s were more in underground dance scenes, and especially the 909 in like techno, house music, and then the 808 in particular became more prominent later as it was used in different ways in hip hop music and stuff, and now in trap music. So let's see what we can come up with here. I want to check out the DX actually. So the Oberheim DX, another one of my favorite machines, DMX. I used this in a couple of productions that I love. It has a real great snappiness to it. I associate the DMX with 80s hip hop, like really early hip hop, you know, this kind of like, think of like Breakin' to Electric Boogaloo, or like, you know, real street hip hop sounds of, you know, breakdancing contests and stuff. It really has that kind of sound. Really great tom sounds. My favorite 80s drum machine tom sounds are the 707, but I love the DMX too. Another great clap. Can't go wrong with the clap. This might have too bright of a sound, but let's just mess around and see what we get with it. That's intriguing. So at least I've got an idea for a pattern there that kind of interests me, at least for the faster section, and then we can maybe audition some different drum sounds for a second. But let's record that. It's interesting. One thing I like to do sometimes, especially if I know in my head that I want to introduce a faster percussion element later, like a tambourine or a shaker playing 16ths, is to just go with a slower pattern on the hi-hats. And sometimes I like to do just instead of on the ones and twos, I want to do it on the ands, like a reggae pattern. That's what I was playing just now, and later we can fill in the space with some more percussion. But let's try that. Whoops. So there's that open hat. Not a ride cymbal, I want the open hat. Alright, so that's getting us somewhere. So now I just want to audition some different drum machines, and I'm trying to remember, but I'm 90% sure that the pad layout is identical across kits in the Kings of Kong, so we're not going to have like a rim shot here when there's a snare on this kit. But the 505 is not the best sounding Roland kit ever made, but it has its own kind of thing. Very small sound. So the question is, what am I going for here? I kind of want something with a dark, kind of a heavier sound, something gritty. Now, Simmons' drums were interesting. Simmons had a sound where the snare almost sounds like a tom. So I don't use it that often. Great kick, though. Really firm kind of kick. There's a great... maybe on another video I'll talk more about this, but one of my favorite drum libraries, drum instruments, is VST, and so it doesn't run in at least this version of Reason, but Addictive Drums 2, that platform by Excellent Audio is excellent for drums, virtual drums of any variety, and they have a product called Real Machines, and it's got samples of 5 classic 80 machines, the 808, the 909, the DMX, the Lin, and something else that I'm forgetting. Oh, the Simmons. That's what brought it up in my mind. Great versions of all of those. I don't think I've used the Simmons here in Kings of Kong before. That sounds more like a snare. It also sounds like a sample. The original Simmons drum module, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, was just an analog machine, not sample based. Let's see how that goes. That's cool. I like that. It has more of a kind of heavy feel, and because the Simmons kit was sort of analog in nature, it sounds almost like a much upsampled, higher quality version of some of the analog drums you were capable of creating in a 8 or 16-bit console. Just can't get over, though, how much that snare sounds like a tom. It has that bow kind of sound to it. I'm loving this kit, though. I think we're going to stay with this, especially. Can't wait to do some drum fills with those toms. Tom fills, essential for 80s sounds. Claps, essential for 80s sounds. And if you got some percussion in there, what's the percussion in this kit? I love me a cowbell or something. But what do we have here? Got the hats. Yeah, well, it's a Simmons, so I'm not expecting that there's going to be like percussion samples like there is in the DMX or the Lin, but we can always layer that if we wanted to. Okay, so I think we're getting close to as far as I want to go with this today. But we got something interesting going on, and more than anything, I wanted to give you just a little bit of insight into the way I think about production and songwriting and starting something from a blank canvas. Setting limitations, I think, is invaluable for extra creativity. Starting with the melody, I think, not only yields more interesting, more memorable songs, but probably more interesting, memorable chord progressions, and we'll get into that more if I continue this session later. If you have a melody, the roots of the chords, and a rhythm, you've got a song, really, and it'll be interesting to continue with this. This is really just an experiment for me because I wanted to see about doing a video session like this and what it would be like. Wanted to jump back into Reason after a while, not doing any production in it. Wanted to do something kind of digital and video gamey because I've been, really interested in those sounds lately. So this is not like your typical track from me, but the approach, I would say, is. All right, well, this has been a lot of fun. I hope it's been interesting for you. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more, please leave me a comment. Tell me what you'd like to see more of. Would you like to see more of the gear, the virtual gear I use? Hear more about the songwriting process? Just kind of see me continue working on something like this, or a track where I'm further along and see how I finish it? I'm interested in all those things, and I'm just interested in sharing my process and sort of behind the scenes view for you. Whether you're a 80s and 90s retro music, synthwave, retrowave producer, and you're interested in other people's workflows and gear, or you're just a music fan and it's cool to see how this stuff is made, maybe, flaws and all. Either way, I hope this was cool for you, and let me know. All right, this has been Ethan, the Go Small, and can't wait to see you retro-loving people again. Bye.